an amazing tank, and the way that he does things is just, I talked to him last night and I was beyond impressed. So let me introduce Matt Dudley, and I want to make sure that you guys can see him. So if you cannot see him, let me know. Cruz, can you see him? He's on a phone, so. And Matt, welcome. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, let's just start off because so far I think that they can see you, so we're doing well. Tell me a little bit about how you got into aquariums in the first place.
I started keeping a saltwater aquarium when I was young and as a kid, and then obviously once I got a little older and got into college and everything, I no longer was able to keep things. But once I got out of college and had my own place, and I decided to get back into the hobby. And then once I got back into the hobby, I just took off with a 300 that I started out with. It was a 300 long, and eventually that went into a 300 cube, and then eventually that went into the 540 that I have now.
Absolutely. I mean, and one of the things that really shocked me when I started looking into, your past and such, the video that played, by the way, folks, apparently it was showing, I basically taped an old video and it was showing the talking from the old video. I apologize. We'll edit that later. But anyways, what really impressed me when I first looked into your past basically is that you used to be the fish guy, the one that always kept the best fish but weren't into coral. So what changed your mind on that? What made you switch over to coral?
I was doing pretty successful with just keeping mainly lots of collector fish, and then once I got pretty good at keeping those and being able to make everything thrive, I wanted a little bit more of a challenge. And a lot of my friends had already been doing SPS for years, and they used to give me a hard time because I didn't keep any corals. So I tried keeping some of their corals. And in the very beginning, I just killed everything, and I was not good at keeping things at all. So the challenge was accepted to try and see if I could match some of the things that they were doing. And once I did that, things kind of just took off from there.
Right.
Lots of trial and error, a lot of failure.
Well, and that's one of the key things that we discussed last night, and of course we'll hone in on that as we talk. But let me just say, when he gives you his few pieces of advice, you're going to be really impressed. I was, because stability and working through things and researching, it's great advice. So anyhow, Matt, okay, well, why don't you give me a rundown of your system? Just tell me the basics overall of the system.
The system is a 540 ATM tank, and it is powered with three of the Red Dragon DC 230 pumps. Two of them run the main display, and one of them runs the reactors and the 8-foot frag tank that is hooked to the system. The system is with a skimmer. It has the Bubble King Supermarine 300 skimmer. It has GHL 2.1 dosers. I do have a denitrator that I built myself and use. We'll get into that a little bit later. I do use dual GFO reactors, and we'll talk about that also. The system is pretty simple. I keep not a lot in the sump other than just miracle mud and macroalgae.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to fix you in the middle now.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention lighting on the display tank is powered by 8 radions, 8 T5s for accent, and 4 of the Reef Bright all blue XHOs. And then the frag tank has 8 radions on it.
Nice. And that's one of the things that you did mention when I was, and we'll get into more of this as we go, but when I was asking you for advice on my tank, one of the things you mentioned is buying quality. Can you talk a little bit about why you think that that's really important and why you choose to buy the best?
When you're keeping animals alive, you're going to want them to thrive and not just survive. So when I was purchasing equipment for things, I didn't want to be purchasing 3 or 4 or 5 of them. And I didn't go out and purchase everything overnight. I researched the different products that I wanted, and I knew what I wanted to have. And if I didn't have the money for it at the time, I just saved up until I did have the money at the time, so that I would make sure I was purchasing it once and not 5 times over. So it was kind of an addition by subtraction, by being able to just slowly build things up. This system was put together, on a budget, obviously, but I just kind of kept parlaying things into itself as I kept adding more and more to the system.
Absolutely. And I don't mean to skip around, guys. It's just all so fascinating. So tell me what types of fish you have in there, like naming your favorites and just kind of giving an overview of, can we get
The
an
system at
idea?
the system, it grows, whenever I'm at, month by month, as I'm adding different things to it, and I'm still adding more fish to it. But at the moment, there's a little bit over 100 fish in the system. I believe, if I can remember correctly, there's 5 pairs of dwarf angels. There's around 67 anthias, 62 leer tails, and there's 5 sunburst. There's around 42 wrasses. There's 2 tangs at the moment, large blonde Nassau, and a powder blue,
Nice.
and 13 clownfish. Oh, I'm sorry, I forget them all.
No,
It's
go
hard to
ahead.
remember them all without writing it down. There's a pair of tasseled filefish. There's a pair of mollies that I can from brackish waters that I converted over to salt water. I know I'm forgetting some of them. I'll think of them in just a minute, but it's sometimes hard to remember all of them.
Sure, absolutely. I think I only asked you last night what your favorite was, so I sprung that on you. Sorry. This channel's very laid back, so no worries. If you want to interrupt,
No problem.
interrupt. And with the fish, some of the fish that you're naming are hard to keep fish. So you were telling me a little bit last night. I just wanted you to touch on your secret for keeping these hard to keep fish.
Probably the most delicate I have are the red-tailed tamarin wrasses. They start out because they're poor shippers. They suffer from a smallmouth syndrome, so most people don't feed them properly. If you'll look in some of my videos on YouTube, and you can see where I'm feeding things, I created a little bit of a feeder box for it. In the bottom of that feeder box, it has a egg crate in the bottom. So when I'm feeding the frozen food in there, I'm raking that across there, and it's like a cheese grater, and it's shredding that food up. All of these fish that suffer from that smallmouth syndrome, they're gulpers. They gulp their food. They don't bite it and chew it up.
Right.
So when they spit that food back out, normally all the other bigger fish and aggressive eaters are just gobbling it up. And most people run into those fish. They think they're eating, but then a week later they just die on them. So one of the things you have to be aware of is their actual natural feeding habits. So these gulping fish that gulp their food, you want them to be able to keep that food in and not spit it back out. So it's key to shredding up food and keeping it in a very thin particulate, so that when it's in that water column, they can just take it all in and they're not spitting it out. And if you notice quite a few of my videos, you'll see the anthias, all the wrasses that suffer from these, some of the very small fish, they're all just taking it right in and nobody's spitting anything out. And that's a key to health of your fish, is making sure that they're feeding well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I loved when you actually talked about that, because it's one of the problems when people are getting smaller seahorses or trying to breed seahorses. So I wanted to say very quickly, I do see the comments. Thank you for coming, Joanne. And I'm so excited you're getting your seahorses, but got to get back to the point. Sorry, Matt. Just wanted to acknowledge you. Okay. So obviously you have ridiculous amounts of SPS coral in the tank. Can you tell me which are your favorites, or the hardest that you've kept, and that kind of thing?
When I first started keeping things, one of the funniest things is this tank hasn't had a water change in 4 years, but one of the funniest things with this tank, up until about 6 months ago, I couldn't keep bird's nest. Everybody can keep bird's nest,
Right.
and I can't keep a bird's nest. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of sunk in. That was probably the hardest coral, I would have to say, keeping, no matter what. Friends would bring me over beautiful pieces of purple and green and ORA pieces of bird's nest. It didn't matter what it was, just a plain green bird's nest. Normally, this thrives for most people. In my system, I couldn't keep it alive. That was probably the hardest piece I've kept. Probably my favorite piece is in the background on the screen here,
Mm-hmm.
a golden jaw dropper that I have, and I've grown that out from a frag, and now it's a nice sized colony. And it's really just the centerpiece of my tank, I think.
I would have to agree. It's beautiful. I can't wait to get my tank back in order, thanks to your help. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But my tank back in order so that I can try to, talk you out of a piece of that. But anyhow, okay. So you did mention at the beginning that the way that you've gotten this tank to this level from starting from learning and then getting to the point where your coral are actually thriving. We talked about surviving versus thriving. So walk me through some of the things that you learned during your learning experience that helped you, like leading up to the denitrator and the that kind of thing.
Everything with this system was trial and error, and it didn't look like this overnight. It took years of trying different methods and different things. And finally, when I was converting over from fish to trying, to keep mainly SPS, it took a good year and a half before I was able to get things to start thriving as opposed to just surviving. And that was mainly due to high phosphates and high things that were leached into the rocks and everything, switching over from a fish only, because when it was a fish only, I could care less about phosphates, and my fish could too. And that really was a pain getting things switched over. And it took about a year before I could finally get things settled in and figure it out. I tried all kinds of different methods, and this system has over 1,000 gallons. So it's definitely not something you can just do overnight. And I tried different methods to keep the cost down. At first, everybody is familiar with GFO. So I tried GFO, and GFO, you were burning through it, and it's expensive. So I really wanted to get away from that. So I started researching other methods, and I ended up using lanthanum chloride. And with lanthanum chloride, you can get that very inexpensively through any one of your pool supply companies. And I went with lanthanum chloride, and I dripped into a sock, a 10 micron sock, and I would drip for about 4 or 5 hours every weekend, because you do want to be present when you're dripping a lanthanum chloride, because it's some nasty stuff, and it binds the PO4, and you really don't want that in your system. It sinks and it binds immediately, but that buildup of stuff can affect your tanks and fish and other things. So you don't want to be just dumping it into the system. So you'd have to be home and change the filter socks as they would clog. So each time things would clog, I'd have to then take the socks out, clean them, put them back in. And in the beginning, the phosphates were over 2, so they would clog within, an hour. So I had to immediately just take them out, clean them, put them back in. And it was this type of process every weekend. And it would seem like I was winning the battle. And on a Sunday, after dripping all weekend, both days, I would take a measurement that night, and it would look like it's 0 on the PO4. Next morning, I'd wake up and it'd be back up over 1. And what was happening was the PO4 was leaching back out of the sand and out of the rock to fill that void in the water column, and it was sucking it back out. So
Right.
it was a long process of just taking all of this out of the tank.
I bet. And once you
And at the
got,
same time,
go
trying to
ahead.
keep things stable for your corals, because that slam going low with the PO4, acros definitely don't like that.
Right. And once you got to that, we talked a little bit last night about once you got to that point where you realized that I'm going to pronounce it wrong, the chloride, let's just say that, was not going, because you mentioned that it doesn't work once you get below like a certain uh, low level.
Lanthanum chloride works well until you get into that 0.0, that 0.1 range. Once you get down into like a 0.08, 0.09, anything low in that range, lanthanum chloride kind of loses its ability to bind really well. So it becomes kind of ineffective. At that point, once I would get it to stay there and not jump back up overnight, then I switched to GFO, and got it down to, into the 0 range that I was seeking. And then once I was able to get it into that range, I noticed that it needed to be a little bit more stable. So one of the things that I ended up doing was I switched to having dual GFO reactors, because I would notice at the end of the month, as the GFO reactor was clogging, the sponges were clogging, and it was wearing out, needed to be changed, PO4 was creeping up. Well, that PO4 creeping up a little bit into a 0.08, not a big deal at all for the acros. They're fine. But when you would change that GFO, it would slam it back down to 0, and the acros didn't like that change.
Right.
So my SPS were kind of not thriving as well as they could be. So I had to figure out a way to where it could maintain at a certain level. So what I did was I used one GFO reactor and started it fresh, and then 3 weeks later I started another GFO reactor, and then from that point on, every other month I would change the opposite one, so that you always maintained a base level of a low PO4. And then I would add back any nutrients I wanted to be in the tank by dosing. I've always found it easier to keep things at a baseline 0 and then add back what I want, as opposed to trying to target a certain 0.03 or 0.04.
Right. Absolutely. Don't chase. And what's funny is, Cruz, I see your comments. Thank you. And this information has to sound extremely familiar because you taught me the same things, Don't chase numbers, but basically take out what you have to, add back in what you need to. It's a better system. I couldn't agree more. And it's so, I don't know. I just think I think your advice is excellent. As far as the 2 GFO reactors, I was telling you last night, that reminds me of my algae scrubber having 2 screens, because you don't ever want to be without whatever's taking your nutrients up. So very good advice. Okay.
It just keeps it more stable, and that's when you're working with SPS, that's the key to everything, is stability.
There you go, people. Stability.
Which kind of led me into the next thing that I targeted after getting nutrients under level, and that was keeping alkalinity where I wanted it to be.
Let's talk about that, because his answer to the alkalinity question surprised me, and I'm changing my methods up thanks to his advice. Go ahead. How did you keep your alkalinity stable?
I wanted to be able to keep it, more than just stable. I wanted to keep it, if you would call it, a super stable. I didn't want it to budge at all, or barely budge. And I am a firm believer of using Kalkwasser. So what I did was I came up with the amount of Kalkwasser that I was going to be using on a daily basis. And then I know that kind of like a less is more. You want to be putting that in around the clock, as opposed to putting it in your top off, and depending on evaporation, that's going to be a different amount, or just dosing it at night. I had seen a lot of people, dosing it at night to try and keep pH up. So I started some trials, and I started dosing once an hour, and then I saw more stability from that. Then I went to a half hour and saw even more stability in my pH and everything else. So then I switched to doing it every 15 minutes. So once I started doing it every 15 minutes, I realized I could be even more stable with it by adding my 2-part with it, and then putting that 2-part into a 4 times an hour. So at the top of the hour, it's Kalkwasser. Then 2 minutes later, then it's my Alk, Calc, and Mag, the magnesium added, also with the 2-part.
Right.
And then at the 15-minute mark, it goes back to Kalkwasser, and then it's Alk, Calc, Mag, then back to Kalkwasser, and then Alk, Calc, Mag, and it does this around the clock. So when it's doing this around the clock, you'll notice your pH doesn't budge. My pH on my tank, it raises and lowers less than 0.1%. And I don't chase pH. I don't chase numbers, but what I do watch and maintain is the change on the pH. It's not really having a higher pH or a little bit lower pH that your acros won't like. It's that change going on from a day to day. So I started graphing, and I started looking at things, and using the Kalkwasser was a real game changer for myself in keeping that pH and that alkalinity stable by dosing it in small amounts around the clock.
Gotcha. And I love the idea. And I will let anybody watching know that Matt did send me some images, but I just didn't have enough time to throw them together. So there will be an article that will follow up this video and show some of the images that he sent. So if there's anything that you want to see, obviously he would be happy to share with you, let him know, or let me know, and I'll make sure to include it and get his expert opinion in the article. Okay, so that leads us then, unless I've missed something, I'm sorry if I have, but really quickly to cruise and Salty Reef, it's not 1500. It really is 1000. The problem is that YouTube is debating. They apparently need to check the channel for a month or something, and then Super Chat will be available. I love you guys for asking, though. All right, sorry, Matt. Back to you. And so,
Yeah, no problem.
what I was going to ask was, so you got your pH stable, you got your PO4 and oh gosh, I'm going to say I'm wrong now. Your nitrates and phosphate down to a doable
Well,
level.
that brought us up to nitrates.
Yes,
You know, on
right,
things.
right.
I was doing in the very beginning. I was doing some water changes to keep that, and that brought me to figuring out how I could do nitrates on that. But I'll answer one of your questions there. That I see the Salty Reef there was asking
Yes,
about.
please.
Do I see any raise in salinity? No. The tank doesn't raise in salinity from the kalkwasser. The top off is still running. I just don't recommend running your kalkwasser through your top off, because then you're getting a different amount every day depending on evaporation. And here in South Florida, we have a lot of evaporation. This tank can evaporate 8-9 gallons a day. This system can. So if it's a dry winter and it's not evaporating much, I'm dosing more kalkwasser, which means I'm changing my alkalinity more. The next day, if we're getting a little bit of humidity rising and it's evaporating more, then alkalinity is changing again, and that gets back away from that stability.
Right. Absolutely. And yes, please feel free to answer any questions you see in the comments. Lucy's usually in here with me. I think she might have been busy tonight, but she's in the chat. And I will let everyone join after I finish my few more questions and ask anything you'd like. But we are watching the questions. Obviously, he's doing a better job than I am. It's cool. But
no problem. This is my first time doing it like this, so I'm kind of learning the system where your questions are at to be able to actually see them at the same time and
right.
be able to respond.
Well, we're going.
That brought us up to the next thing, which was keeping things stable with nitrates.
Yes.
And I have a good friend who's a chemist, and speaking with him and working back and forth, we derived a method of using bacteria to keep the nitrates down. I have a biodenitrator that is loaded with a slimy, nasty bacteria, but the water in it is clear as a crystal. And the way it basically works is it's fed a carbon source. I use methanol because I have a large system. Methanol is cheap. It's very effective. It's 99% carbon source. So the only problem that we found with it in the beginning was it is flammable. So when we get it, we immediately cut it. You can buy for 5 gallon bucket of it will cost you roughly $38. And that will last my system over a year worth of nitrate controls for $38 on 1,000 gallons and heavily loaded fish. So when we were working with that and trying to figure out what to use, that was the ticket, in using the methanol. So it's basically racing fuel, but it's pure carbon. So what we did was we figured out that the bacteria that are in this chamber, they're feeding and they're reproducing and they're wanting energy. So the first thing they do is, since this chamber of water that is separated away from the system, the first thing they do is they strip the oxygen out of the system, and then you're still feeding them with a little bit of a carbon source. And when we talk about a little bit, per cycle on my biodenitrator uses 8 milliliters. So we're talking very, very small amount. And what happens is, after this chamber is stripped of its oxygen, the O2, the bacteria still want to do their thing, reproduce and feed. They need more energy, so they go over to the NO4 and they strip the oxygen NO3, and they strip the oxygen molecule away from the NO3, leaving NO2, and then NO2 just degasses off. This cycle on my system takes approximately 8 hours. Once that's over, pump turns on with my Apex and then flushes the chamber. And then in a nutshell, the whole cycle process takes over again. So 3 times a day, my chamber is 30 gallons. So 3 times a day, 30 gallons is going back into my system with a absolute zero NO3 in it.
It's amazing. I mean, I can't. And when really quickly, can you tell when you were telling me last night how I could do that? Is there any way to do that on a smaller scale? I know we were talking about the calc on a smaller
If you're going
scale.
to use this method could be used on any scale. You could use a very small custom chamber. You could use a Tupperware container. You could use a small 10-gallon aquarium. The chamber itself is just lined with egg crates, so it gives the bacteria a place to grow on. It has a small circulation pump in it. And then it's a DIY project, and I rigged it up to where my doser doses the 8 milliliters of the methanol RODI 50/50 solution at a certain time, and it knows when the apexes shut things off. So I have it dosing at those times.
Mm-hmm.
The bacteria does its thing, strips the water of the NO3, which I'm targeting getting rid of, flushes back in. So in my system, this is 1/10 of the system roughly, because it's 90 gallons and I have roughly 1,000 gallons, a little bit more. So roughly I was targeting that per day, 1/10 of the system is going back in with a pure zero on the NO3. And it only takes a very small amount of time if you have high nitrates before this will just strip those nitrates right down.
Right.
And then if and I'm paying attention to the corals and I'm seeing my coloration, if you're getting some pastels and they're kind of fading and not looking quite vibrant that you're used to seeing or you want to see, then you can add back nitrates to the system. And an easy way to add back nitrates to the system is strontium nitrate, which they sell on eBay in a powder form. You can buy a brick pound of it, which you can mix up into a lot of gallonage, and you can buy that for $3. So everything I've done with this system was basically, targeting high efficiency and low cost.
Right. And couple quick things, questions about what you just said. First of all, Cruz, this is for you. If you do happen to join or later on, whatever, I'd love to know how this compares, the denitrator compares to, Steve's cryptic zone. And I know it's not the same, but I just want to know how it compares. And I knew you'd be happy to hear about the bacterial plankton and all that. Okay. And then also, let's see, what was I going to ask you? Oh, I totally lost it. Hang on, give me a second.
That led. Now I was getting the nutrients in line. Then I was getting the alkalinities in line, getting everything stable. Temperature.
Matt, really fast. I just wanted to mention anyone watching. What I was going to say is that he has hit upon it, but just to be very clear, he's talking about doing these things while testing constantly and watching the coral and things like that. We're not at all suggesting that people just, try to do this without.
Yeah, this is definitely not something you want to go into blind. I do a lot of research before I do things. I don't just wake up and decide I'm going to do this. And that's another thing too, getting back to the fish, I don't just walk into the fish store and say, oh, wow, that's pretty, let me get that. I do a lot of research on what I'm getting, and I target fish that are going to be beneficial to the system, so that not only are they beneficial to the system's beneficial to them, so they can thrive. I target a lot of little fish and small fish because obviously I want the waste from them so it can go right in for my corals. I target certain bigger fish because they're going to obviously work as a cleanup crew, and they're going to keep the peace with everybody else also. So there is a method to things, but you're absolutely right. You can't jump into things. You have to do a lot of research on stuff.
I'm gonna steal your.
This hobby teaches patience.
Sorry. Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to steal your tagline, but it's his tagline. He deserves it. I loved this phrase. What he said last night was build the tank around, or I'm sorry, now I'm going to say it backwards. You go ahead. Say your tagline. Build go ahead.
You got to build you need to build the filtration around your fish and not just throw your fish in and then strip away your filtration, strip away the health of those fish because you've skimped on the filtration.
Right.
When you're putting things together, you really should do yourself some justice, and those animals that you're keeping justice on putting them in a system that's going to allow them to thrive. I can't stand that. That's a pet peeve of mine when people, you can get away with it, but I just can't stand it when they're not feeding their animals properly. They're skimping on them because they skimped on filtration or other things. That's a pet peeve of mine. We'll stay away from that issue.
Okay.
That's for another time.
Okay. Well, if anybody else asks him, he's got to answer. But anyways, talking to him one on one, you'll get. He's very smart about this stuff. Anyhow, and I could not agree more because I'm the same way when we talk seahorses. I'm like, just because they're surviving, they're not thriving. Come on, and let's set up the tank right first before you get the seahorses. So I saw, Lucy, you were telling someone not to rush earlier. Couldn't agree more. Don't rush, do it right, and it'll pay off. Anyhow, Matt, if you were on a roll, so if you want to go on with your thing, I will save my questions until you are ready for them.
No problem.
Or no, I mean,
Yeah, no problem. I just, one of the things that this system has a lot of high-end equipment, but you don't have to have high-end equipment to achieve the same thing. Don't think that you can't achieve a high success rate with acros or high-end acros or other things without, with equipment that isn't the very most expensive. You don't have to go that route. Obviously, I try and target buying quality equipment. And there is a lot of quality equipment out there, in that middle of the road price range. I do stay away from the very low end range. You're just going to end up putting yourself in a world of hurt if you're not an experienced reefer and you're not keeping on track and on top of cleaning and on top of those things. Because it's like, buying a Sears Home Life lawnmower that you're going to go out and mow 25 lawns a day with. It's not really made for that. It'll get you by mowing the lawn once a week, but you're not going to do 25 a day. It's just not going to work. So that is one thing that I did target, with this system, was making sure that, I could target things around the health of the animals that I put into it.
Yeah, literally, guys, he has pictures of documentation and different invertebrates and stuff on his wall. It's so cool. I wish I was there with him so that we could show you the fish room because it's really awesome. Richard with Aficionado did an excellent video, but his tank looks even better now. So anyhow, okay, so basically we're talking about building the filtration around the fish. We've talked about the GFO using dual, so that it's never too strong or too weak. We've talked about the denitrator. What else? You talked about getting a quality skimmer.
The next thing I got to when I finally got to where things were just really booming with my acros, I was wanting to see if I could push the envelope even more and was there a way that these animals could actually even thrive more than what I've already thought they were? And don't get me wrong, it wasn't, beautiful overnight. I've battled a lot with algae and other things. So in my quest to, make it best for these animals, I came to a couple of realizations. Bacteria is a key, and I think temperature is a key also. One of the things I try and target with acros, I keep a little bit lower temperature. I keep things from around 73 to 75. And the reason I do that is because I notice better coloration in the acros because there's more oxygen at a lower temperature rate. So more oxygen keeps that slime coat from building up on the acros and allows them to actually thrive even a little bit more. And I've noticed a little bit better coloration. So I was kind of able to tweak and stumble into that. And then at the same time, algae has always been a nuisance of mine, even though I have zero NO4 or NO3 and zero PO4. I have a strand of algae that was growing in my system that would just thrive at low nutrient levels because its metabolism was able to take what was in the water column before I was even able to measure and get an actual measurement of anything. It wasn't even showing up, but it's still thriving.
Really quick.
It was a process to get rid of it.
Let me interrupt you really quick and just let you know I explained this in another video. I gotta tag myself here. I explained this in the macroalgae video about phosphates, how you can test, get a 0, but it's still there, and the algae is actually taking it up. If you've got
Still,
algae, it's still
there. If
there.
you're measuring
So
on a
inorganic,
parts per
organic.
million,
Right.
a parts per million level, you use the ultra low and measure on a parts per billion level, you're going to see there's still a huge portion there. And most people just measure and think that with a HANA, if they're not using the ultra low, they're just using the regular, they're thinking, oh, I have zero phosphates. It's not that way. They're still present there, and that algae can just decimate your tank quickly, and it just grows so fast. But I did stumble onto another product as I was using it,
Yes.
and I'm very skeptical, like you are, of different products that are out there. You know, the snake oils and the magic in a bottle. But I am familiar with bacterias, and I, in my research to try and find out what was happening in this system and what I could do to target getting rid of these algae. I came across a product from reference from a couple of friends, and they said they had had good luck with it. So I tried it out, and I've had nothing but wonderful success with using a product called Vibrant.
I know you were going to stop right there. I was getting ready to post something and say, here we go. Okay. So first tell me your experience
And I
with
really
Vibrant.
don't. And anybody, you know, a lot of people, you know, I have lots and lots of requests for what do you do? What do you do about this? What do you do about that? Everything comes down to water quality.
Yes.
And when it comes to my tank, I really don't just dump anything in, and I don't
Right.
use chemicals or other things. I just heavily feed the fish. I keep it simple. And I was skeptical at first, but I did realize that, you know, my bacteria, after 4 years of not having a water change on this system, the bacteria in the system were a little bit out of whack. The bad bacteria, if you want to call it, were a little bit higher than the beneficial bacteria, and the beneficial weren't doing their job. So I needed to boost it up. So that's basically what the Vibrant does, is it adds a bacteria to the system, and it keeps boosting that up. So then that bacteria is taking those nitrates and those phosphates out of the water column. Even though you're not measuring them, it still shows zero. They're there, remember? And that Vibrant, that bacteria, once that good bacteria boosts up to a level where it can compete, it takes out that nutrients out of the water column, and that algae just started hurting. And you could tell it had that white look to it, that ghost look to it, and it was not happy. And immediately it just started shrinking up and gone. And I kind of stumbled upon this product using it for the algae. I was at MACNA in Vegas, and when I came back, I had a problem with a couple pumps. So the flow and the circulation wasn't quite what it should have been, and I had a problem with genoflagellae, the genos, and I wanted to get rid of that immediately and get on top of it. So I eventually, you know, I chose this product, and that's why I targeted it, was for those dinos. Within a week and a half, the dinos were gone. But in that second week, I noticed that the algae was hurting also. So I knew that I was onto something here with adding the bacteria. So I continued my use of the bacteria, and I was into my second month of using it. 100% algae gone out of everywhere in my tank. And I've always had algae present, even though the acros thrive and the corals thrive, and the fish are thriving. That algae was thriving also.
Right.
But I do feel vindicated because I finally, you know, had some success at getting rid of it.
Yes. And just a note before I do my spiel, because I'm going to do it. But
Sure.
how did it affect your macroalgae add-on on Refugium? What do you call it? A macro display? Is that what it's called?
It was, I have a 50-gallon macroalgae tank,
Okay.
and it's just beautiful. And I only kind of keep one macroalgae in it, and that's a dragon's breath. And if you see on my YouTube, you can see some beautiful macroalgae. I will have to warn everybody and tell you, your macroalgae, if you have a macroalgae system connected to the tank, it will take a hit because it's losing all the nutrients too. It doesn't kill it off, but it definitely does not look at its 100% best. After I just got rid of all of the algae, I'm going to keep with adding the bacteria. for probably a few more weeks, and then I'm going to wean off of it so that I can get my macroalgae back in line. And then I'm hoping that my macroalgae system will then be able to start thriving, and it'll take over the competing of those nutrients in the water column,
Right.
and I won't be having to add more bacteria into it, and that bacteria levels will stay. But it'll be all of a monitoring back and forth and looking at the system and checking and seeing. And if I see the bacteria coming and then the macroalgae not as doing as well yet, I probably will have to go back to adding a little bit of bacteria. But it'll be touch and go back and forth to see. But I will wean off of it after I get everything back in line here and let the macroalgae start taking over.
Gotcha. Okay, first of all, Joanne, I want to say directly to you, there's no stupid questions, none whatsoever. Matt, I'm going to give you a chance to answer her question in a moment, or anyone can, but she wanted to know, she's getting the typical, she's very new, and she's getting the typical brown and green algae on her sand and etc. I have an answer, but I'll let you answer first. But before that, I want to publicly apologize to the people who make Vibrant, because I was one of the people who thought that it was snake oil. And when I asked to know the ingredients, there was, little, obviously vendors or, creators, whatever you want to call them, can't tell you all the ingredients. And so I just didn't believe that this product could possibly work. They would not tell me the bacteria strains. I'm not going to defend myself anymore. The bottom line is, I didn't even try it, and I kind of said, no way, this is not going to work. I don't believe you. I apologize. I should have given it at least a chance. I should have at least tried it. Now I've got someone that I look up to completely telling me that this product works. So, first of all, I apologize for doubting and not checking.
You don't have to worry, because I doubted also.
Right.
And when you pour it out of the bottle and you're measuring it out, it looks like water.
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, here we go again. And I couldn't believe it. And I was like, is this just RODI? Is this just water? But
it works.
The bacteria was the key. It worked.
Well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to keep interrupting.
I can't say. Yeah, it worked.
It works. Okay, so for anyone watching, what I'm going to do is, you guys don't understand, you don't have any idea, because I haven't shown you how badly my reef is doing because I neglected it. And so I'm going to actually be redoing the reef tank. I'm going to try the Vibrant. Cruz had mentioned in the comments that I was talking about the competition. If there's a product that you would like me to compare, I do have separate tanks, let me know. But I'm going to walk you guys through it and actually show you the change. So Vibrant people, if you're watching, because I asked you to, apologies, and I need to place an order, because I'm going to show the truth and give you the chance. So sorry. And back to Matt. Go ahead.
You're one user there that asked a question on that,
Yes.
and Cruz was actually absolutely right. That bacteria she's getting on there, you just need to outcompete that and take that out of there. And the Chemi, if you use a Chemi Clean, that will take that right out of there. If she's getting a cyanobacteria, that'll take it right out. Just follow the directions with that. I've used that in my very beginnings when I had some cyano. The chemically takes it right out. Won't have a problem taking that out. Just don't make the mistake of leaving your skimmer on.
Well, I was actually going to say, because, and apologies if I missed the end of the questions while I was trying to talk to the camera, but if your tank is absolutely brand new and you just have like the diatoms, or however you pronounce it, or the regular, a new tank not only goes through bacteria cycles, but it goes through algae cycles too. They will go away on their own if you just keep up on the water quality and maintenance. So if I missed a cyano comment, absolutely what they're saying, use the ChemiClean. But if it's just normal stuff that you've just started a tank, then give it a minute before you just try to, whatever. But That's my opinion. That's
You
my two
got to
cents.
do your research and make sure you know exactly what it is you're seeing.
Yes.
Ask a friend to come over that's a little bit more qualified for it, so they can
Yes.
basically look at that and tell you this is what you actually have. Take some pictures of it. Ask on a group such as this group or a few others, and make sure you're treating the right symptoms. The right causes with the right symptoms.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that Matt and I discussed at length last night is just how, difficult it is these days because there's so many weekend warriors and, we won't get into
And
it, but
that is one thing you got to be, in this hobby. If you're going to be on Facebook or other places and you're going to be in groups, that is one thing that you have to become a master of, is knowing when you're getting good advice and when you're getting bad advice.
right.
I see it all the time. There's not much you can do about it because there's so much of it out there. You just have to basically train yourself to quickly see, wait a minute, let me research this just a few moments of what this person's talking about or what they're saying. Let me see a picture of their tank and let's see their success. And then I kind of can make a judgment from there whether I think it's trustworthy information. That's usually the first thing. I've had many discussions and getting off track a little bit, but one of my funniest was having a conversation, with a person that said I didn't know what I was talking about, and basically wanted to see my tank, and they put up a picture of their tank, and I really didn't want to make them feel bad, but then they just kept egging it on and kept egging it on. So I said fine, and I gave them a link to my YouTube, and then I gave them a tank to my acro spawning, which doesn't happen quite often for many hobbyists on the hobbyist level at all. And when I did that, then it was pretty much crickets.
Did you guys hear that? He's had coral spawn. Yeah. Coral spawning in a hobbyist tank. That's huge. Okay. Well,
And I do apologize right now because in the video it's kind of hard to see my tank because the lights are so bright on it, and
yeah.
it just looks like a light behind me.
Well, I'll take the blame for that. He kept asking, when am I going to get the link? And with Hangouts, the longer you go, the more he'll start glitching and stuff. So I was like, last minute. So apologies, but as I said, I will do an article and maybe even a video with this information and his pictures and videos to follow up. But let's get back on track. I apologize. So far, Cruz did mention, and I wanted to ask you, he mentioned whenever you strip out like the nutrients, the way that you're talking about with the denitrator, with the GFO, with the skimmer, etc., get your nutrients to zero. You're not doing any water changes, and then you're adding back what you want. So my two questions are, what do you add back? And number two, how do you aerate and provide oxygen?
Um, what I'm doing to add back for trace elements is I use a product called Miracle Mud from Lynx Eye. And that product has been wonderful for addition of trace elements into my system. Obviously, they're not getting trace elements from any kind of a water change. And I have sent Triton test in before. Everything comes back perfectly in the green. I just did it for giggles to see where things would be. I could tell that things were thriving, but I just wanted to make sure I wasn't on the fence on low on something, and then it was going to one day wake up and things weren't doing so hot. So I did want to keep a check on things. And I have sent Triton test in quite a few times, and every time everything has came back in the green on every marker they had, with the exception of potassium K. Potassium K was a little bit low. It was still in the green, but it was at the lower end of it. But potassium K, you have to be very careful with. You can overdose it very easily. And when potassium K is used to target colors in acros, so if you look at my tank, I don't have any problems with coloration of corals.
Right.
And I'm pulling some really wicked colors on some things in the frag tank. So I really didn't want to mess with the potassium K at all. So I kind of just backed away from that and left that one with a grain of salt. But everything else came in perfectly where it should be. Stability is the key.
Yes.
One thing that we forgot to talk about, you touched on it a little bit there when you were talking about, measuring and testing and things of that nature. I test the alkalinity 6 times a day. Every 4 hours, it's tested automatically, and then it comes back and I can see and make adjustments from there.
And what product does that for you?
I have the KH Director by GHL.
Okay.
There's many products out there. They'll monitor and adjust. There's quite a few of them that'll do both. Right now, I have mine adjusting. I use a calcium reactor. I use 2-part, and I use the Kalkwasser. But the KH Director measures every 4 hours, and it takes a measurement, and then it tweaks and backs off and automatically, and it backs off of my 2-part. So it'll lower the amount of 2-part. At the moment, I dose 2.5 gallons of Kalkwasser a day, and I also dose 134 mil of 2-part a day. So that 134 mil fluctuates depending on the alkalinity uptake from the system. Excuse me. And I have just started migrating over, since the 2-part was getting a little high, I have started to migrate over to using a calcium reactor. And I'm still in the infancy of that. I just brought it online in the last week.
Gotcha. Okay, so just overall. Oh, I did have one more question about that. Where do you keep the Miracle Mud? I know I've seen yours.
The Miracle Mud is kept in the macroalgae tank, and then I
Okay.
also have a chamber in my sump. There's a 300-gallon sump below this system, and there's basically a 75-gallon portion of it that's sectioned off, and then the Miracle Mud is kept in there, and then in the macroalgae tank, and then for that Miracle Mud product, you just change 50% of it once a year. So once a year, I just take a hose, and I'll put it into a 5-gallon bucket and start a siphon, and put it in a filter sock, and then I put a pump in the sock, or I'm sorry, below the sock in the 5-gallon bucket, just to a little maxi jet to pump the water right back into the tank, and then I'll just vacuum out 50% of that Miracle Mud, and it's really not mud. It looks like a big particulate of sand or a crushed coral. You can actually see, everything. It's not mud. It's more of a sand substrate, and I'll just vacuum 50% of it off, and then I'll open up the new portions of it, and then just put them into the sump to refill it, and then that's it.
Awesome. Okay, and you do, aside from Miracle Mud adding back trace elements, you do add, you said we've got the calcium reactor, we've got the calcweister, the 2-part, and then you do use one other item, correct? Don't you use Acro Power?
I do. I
Okay.
do dose aminos, and I like the Acro Power from Julian Sprung, Two Little Fishies. I use Acro Power, and I've had some good success with it, and I've used it forever. One of the things I definitely liked about it is I was able to put it on my doser. I don't have to refrigerate it. The doser can then take care of dosing it and going back to that stability. Every day, it's dosing it the daily portion around the clock.
Gotcha. Okay. And so basically, just to recap what we've said so far, you're running this beautiful, amazing display that you're not having to do water changes on. And your basic method is to keep it simple, to strip the nutrients. You lowered them using the sock and the chloride method. Now you use the two dual
Yeah,
GFOs.
using chloride was about 4.5, 5 years ago. About
Right.
5 years ago,
Right.
right before I stopped stopped doing water changes.
Right. Oh, okay. So for the no water change, huge, beautiful display of SPS, you're just using the 2 GFO system. We're dual
Yep,
using it.
that's for phosphate. That's all I'm using right now, and then whatever the macroalgae take up, but mainly
Right.
it's the GFO.
And then the denitrator, which we
Yes,
discussed.
I use the nitrator for the
Nitrator.
nitrates.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Nitrator. Right.
No problem. The nitrator I use for taking out the NO3 and the nitrates and keeping that in check. And other than that, I don't dose anything, any other coral foods. I don't dose anything else. I have tried different coral foods, but I noticed some of them raise the phosphate levels a little bit. So
Gotcha.
I stayed away from it, and I went back to just keeping it simple. Don't have to refrigerate the AquaPower. I can put it on my doser. I can dose it at certain times. It's stable for me. It doesn't raise the phosphate for me. And the corals, it's basically a look and see method, and everyone seems to be happy with the way I'm doing things. So I've kind of just kept it simple and stayed right where, where I'm at. And I stayed in my lane.
I love it because you've used your own methods and your own, like a lot of DIY equipment and then quality, equipment with that, to basically strip the tank, add back what you want, use mineral mud for the micronutrients, and I mean it's amazing. Anybody who sees
It's
your
pretty common.
tank can't has wow. Um,
Yes, and somebody asked, just now asked about, if I'm using the GFO constantly. Yeah, the GFO runs 24 hours a day. Both reactors are running 24 hours a day. And then every other month, I'm changing out the opposite one. So when one is wearing down and getting clogged up and the GFO is wearing down, the other one has just been changed and it's fresh. So you always have a baseline, of GFO that keeps that PO4 at a very low level. It doesn't allow it to creep up as the reactor wears out throughout the month.
Gotcha. Okay, what I'm going to do very quickly because I didn't realize how long I had been talking. I'm so sorry. There's other questions that I have, and I am going to ask you one more before I actually let people in, but I do want to put this link up for you guys so that if anybody does want to join and comment or anything like that or whatever, I'm putting the link up now. If you don't join, that's fine. I'll ask my final questions and as I said again, okay, what I'm going to do very quickly. Hang on, let me hurry up and do this because now we're echoing. How long I had been talking. I'm so sorry. There's other questions that I have, and I am going to ask you one more before I actually let people in. But I do want to. I'm so sorry. All right.
No problem. We're still here.
I'm trying to get the dang link up to you guys. Sorry. Here we go. Give me one more minute. I'm almost there. Maybe. And let's see.
The GFO, another question,
Feel free to talk,
there,
Matt. Thank you. Save me. Go ahead.
No problem. No problem. Your user there was asking, does the GFO strip the phosphates? Absolutely. That's what I'm using it for, is to strip that phosphate out of there. Because I want to keep that phosphate low and in check, and I want to keep it stable. Not just low, but I want to keep it stable. So I want to make sure it's all stripped out, and then I can add back the nutrients that I choose to for the corals. And the way I can add back the nutrients for the corals is by feeding my fish heavily, and then also with some amino acids for the acros. That's
one of the questions I forgot to ask. What do you feed? That was very interesting to me.
Getting back to, how I fed those fish, and making sure things are small. I like to use a brine shrimp. I use a San Francisco Bay brine, and I buy it in bulk. And then I use bloodworms. So those are the only two frozen foods that I use. And I will not lie, from time to time, companies send me flake foods, or they send me pellets, and sometimes I will throw those in there. They give me the small samples, but I really don't use that, pellets or flakes or anything else other than the brine or the bloodworms on a regular basis. And I feed heavily. I'm feeding them usually 3 times a day, and I'm usually feeding my fish as much as most people are feeding their fish in a week in one feeding. It's all about that feeding, and that being able to have those fish put back into the system, that waste that the corals, that the acros desperately need, since I'm stripping away all the nutrients in the system.
Gotcha. One thing.
Controlled addition.
Yes. The one thing that we didn't talk about, which is extremely important, is lighting. What lighting do you use? What do you recommend, and why?
The lighting I use are LEDs and T5s. I wanted to go with an LED because I didn't want the heat issues of the halides. I wanted the aesthetics of the LEDs and being able to ramp them up, ramp them down, control coloration of them. But then I wanted to get a little bit more out of things, so I added, for some supplemental, I added in the T5s. And when I added those Blue Plus T5s in, along with the LEDs, everything just kind of seemed to give me just a little bit more as I was looking for, and it filled in to me what the LED wasn't quite giving me. because my tank is such a deep tank and such a big tank, it's 36 inches deep, and the lights hang approximately 15 inches above the tank. So it's quite a ways down to get to the bottom, and in the corners, I wanted everything to fill in. And when I ran the T5s in front and behind the LEDs, it just filled in every ounce of water that was there, and I could see everything. And that's, you know, what I was shooting for with lighting. Lighting is important, especially when you're talking about acros. But I still am a firm believer that water quality is 10 times more than lighting.
Yes.
You can learn to keep water, you can learn to keep corals.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I'm told that I never ever give a shout out to the lighting that I use. So I'm going to now. When I spoke with Matt last night, we were, kind of comparing the differences because while I want to do an amazing SPS display, I'm never going to have his, 700 gallon, uh, what is it, 500 some, but 700 with
It's
all the
the
extras.
tank itself is 540.
Right. But with all the water volume, it's 700 some, probably more.
No, with all the water volume, it's a little over 1,000.
Oh, see, I'm thinking of, yeah, okay, over 1,000. So I'm not going to ever have that, but I still want to keep nice SPS. And he explained to me that on a smaller level, my SBS reflight, SBS reflight, SBS 5 times SBS reflight is perfect. And if I supplement with a couple of T5s or like reef brights or something like that, I'll be golden for what I want to do. So it doesn't, buy quality, don't go with the cheapest of the cheap, but, based on where you are kind of thing is all I wanted to say. Hey, all right, Matt.
But no problem. And
Don't make fun of me.
no problem. No problem. You should be just fine with that LED lighting that you're using. And you'll notice a big difference when you're adding those T5s in, and it fills in that spectrum, because everything is about spectrum. It's not so much about par. You need to make sure you're hitting that spectrum. And on this system, my overall goal was trying to get to around a 420 on a bell curve, which is that deep blue that once you're about 15 feet down in the ocean, all lighting seems to be blue, and that's the combination that I was looking for.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I did post the link if anyone wants to join and ask any questions. Was there anything else, Matt, that you think we missed that we did not speak about? Because I will go back
I'm sure
and
there is.
yeah, I'll go.
I can answer any questions that anybody has, and I can definitely put up links for, I'm putting together a series right now.
Oh God, I
On
forgot.
how I've done each little piece, as opposed to just talking about it from time to time, because there are so many questions that I miss, and I'm not that great at remembering everything, but I am trying to put together a video documentary. Quite a few people have asked me to put some stuff together for them.
Absolutely. I did forget an extremely important question. Can you tell me a little bit about the website, when it's going up, what we can
I do
expect?
have a website that's in the works. I had prior to a couple of weeks ago, I've never shipped out any of my corals. I do a lot of coral shows, and I sell a lot at the shows and local to friends that come over, or anybody that's interested local. And I've never shipped out before, but now I'm starting to get to where I have so much growth, and I do have a large frag system now for them to make it easier to work in. I have quite a bit of stock that I am now putting up and starting to ship out. And I do have a website that I just put up, and it's my company's name is Saltwater 24/7. And I'm just getting things up, and it should be up within the next 2 weeks. It's there now, but it's under construction. Getting all the photos together of hundreds of acros and different pieces has been a little bit challenging. I guess you could call that my next challenge, is learning how to use a DSLR camera really well.
Absolutely. And yes, Salty Reef, we will absolutely put a link to his website in the description. And do you have a YouTube channel, you said too? Is that where your documentary will
I do
go?
have a YouTube channel and an Instagram, and I have just started documenting and putting things up there. And I'm going to be putting quite a few videos up that we've been working on getting them, of how the biodenitrator works, my
Yeah.
scheduling for Kalkwasser, how everything works. Which triggers another thought. You said, that we might have forgotten something. I don't use a Kalkwasser stirrer. I
Oh,
mix the
yes.
Kalkwasser. I mix the Kalkwasser. For my system, I mix it in a 55-gallon barrel that sits outside the system, outside the fish room. And the only time I stir it is during the first 4 to 5 hours when I'm mixing it. Then I turn it off and let it settle, and it's never stirred again until the next month when I make more. This reasoning is I don't want to be dosing a slurry. I want it to be dosing an exact amount for that stability key. And Kalkwasser is, the 1 teaspoon per gallon. So I know that what I'm dosing into my system, I'm dosing 2.5 gallons a day. So I'm dosing that 2.5 gallons is an exact, it's not a slurry.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. I mean, yes, I remember. Yeah, I understood when you explained that completely. Okay, so anyhow, since none of you joined the link, nobody ever does. I don't understand. Whatever. Either way, I'm going to think of any last minute questions. Check the audience questions. I'm so sorry for keeping you so long, Matt. I appreciate all the information you're sharing. Um, and
D from one of your questions there. D from Brooklyn there asking says, the water change must drain the town's water supply. But once again, I haven't done a water change on this system in over 4 years, other than just replacing 20 gallons of water displacement when I'll take some water with me to a frag swap. And sometimes, I have forgot, or I didn't think the water that I mixed up was quite right. So I have, at times just put straight RODI into the system. But 20 gallons of RODI isn't going to budge over
right.
1,000 gallons.
Don't do that if you have a 50-gallon tank or something.
Yeah.
Please don't do
Don't
that.
do that if you have a 50-gallon tank. That will make a huge difference.
Yeah. Okay, and if you think of anything else while I'm trying to look through these questions, my Lucy left me, so.
They're asking about precipitation. I do have about, like I said, around average is about 7 to 7.5 gallons a day. Sometimes it's a little higher on evaporation for precipitation. And I do have a chiller on the system, but the chiller never kicks on. I've only kicked it on twice, and that was when we were without power for the hurricane. And when about every 6 months, I'll kick it on and test it out to make sure everything's working right. But the system stays quite low because in the fish room, there's a dedicated 2-ton mini split AC system that keeps the system all cool. So the chiller never really kicks on. So precipitation stays pretty steady around 7.5 gallons a day.
Okay, well, I am being told, so sorry, I'm being told that the link doesn't work. So, I'm not sure what to do about that. Unfortunately, I can try it one more time. I will try it one more time. I don't want to take up Matt's whole night because he's been so nice to come and talk to us. But let's see. What else can I ask you to talk about while I try to fix this? Anything else you can think
If
of?
anybody does have any questions, they can feel free to hit me up on Facebook.
There
Not a
you
problem.
go. Okay.
You can come right over and shoot me a message if you're interested in something I'm doing, and or if it might be able to help your system. Not a problem. Just send me a question.
And like I said, you guys, we will link his website, Facebook, Instagram, all of it. Oh, that was one question. You started talking about the different things, but where are you planning to post the actual documenting of how to use the nitrator and that kind of thing? Is it going to be on YouTube or?
I'm gonna post it on YouTube because videos
Share.
are easier to post to YouTube.
Gotcha.
One of the people asked there, what happens to that evaporation that is going out? That AC that is in that room is taking that evaporation right out of that room and then putting it right outside, outside, and it's draining it basically, with the use of the AC.
Okay.
And I do live in Florida.
Matt, give us a basic rundown on what you would tell someone who wanted to start up. I don't want you to repeat everything, no worries, but just, basic, you've already said stability, just kind of run over it for a kind of summary of what you would suggest for someone starting off that wants an SPS. display.
If you're wanting to keep SPS, you have to learn about water quality. Water quality is everything. Cut your teeth, with fish systems or softy coral systems, and as you build up, then work your way, into SPS. But the SPS is not something that is so challenging that someone can't do it. But they definitely need to take their time and learn all the ins and outs, and basically put your time in, with your research and how you're going to set things up, but just take your time with it.
Gotcha. And I did have one other question that I forgot to ask. I noticed when I watch your videos that there is one beautiful flowy green coral. Can you tell me, do you keep anything besides
That's
SPS, and should people mix?
I kept that as my only main softie that a friend had given me, because my clowns like to host in it. It's Sinularia. It's a plow nepia.
But you would,
And
go ahead.
and I kept it because my clowns love it. But I would recommend, if you're going with SPS, stay away from leathers. Keep leathers out of your system if you're keeping SPS. Leathers are a master at chemical warfare, and your SPS will not seem to thrive as much as they will once you get rid of that leather.
Gotcha. All right. I redid the link and tried it again. You got a 10-second warning because I'm going to close it down in like 1 minute, guys. So unless somebody comes in and asks some questions. And Matt, if you see any more in the comments, please feel free to answer them. Otherwise, guys, again,
If you're looking, you can look my Facebook page up. You can look me up with my name, or you can look up my Facebook page, which is Saltwater 24/7, all one word.
And I'll put a link to every single place that you can find him in the description of this video and in the article. So we'll make sure you can contact him. But Matt Dudley, he's a great guy. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us and answering all of these questions, because I know a lot of people really want to keep these beautiful displays as you show, and it's not as easy as some of the other people say, and sharing your truth and information is really valuable. So I really appreciate you coming.
Yes, no problem, and thank you for having me.
Okay, did you see something else you wanted to answer?
Hey, it was funny, some of your guys, were talking about, leathers being, predators, and they definitely are. They will decimate, SPS, if they're anywhere downstream from them. They will take it right out. You'll notice no coloration, in the same range that you'll get once you remove them from the system. Now the Sinularia is a little bit different from those toadstool leathers and other ones like that. But the Sinularia, I've kind of, it's off to itself. It doesn't touch anything. I've kept it kind of secluded, and it doesn't seem to be quite as potent as some of the others.
Gotcha. But still, like if your aim is SPS, maybe just stick to one. Just stick to one species. But
If anybody's interested in contacting me, like you said, just look my name up on Facebook. That's probably the easiest to do. And as I start to get things up in the next couple of weeks, with the Facebook page for my company, and then the website for corals and everything for my company, and Instagram and stuff, you can look that up for Saltwater 24/7.
Gotcha. And Salty Reef, you already know, just message me on Facebook, Seahorse Whisperer Society. How about macroalgae? No problems. Okay, well, I'm going to call this to a close because I've taken up so much of Matt's time. Thank you again. And I will make sure all these links are in the description, guys. As soon as we hang up, I'm going to post these links so you can contact him or, comment. And I promise a follow-up article, and he's already promised a lot of videos coming. So keep trying and keep going. And thank you again, Matt, for coming, because we appreciate your advice.
No problem. Anytime.
Oh, hey, and guys, I will make sure to show you how the vibrant works. No worries. All right, I'm going to say, okay. Matt, I forgot the one big question I forgot to ask you is, do you drink wine? Where's your wine?
I'm not a wine drinker. My flavor is beer.
But he's got a beer, guys. Okay, so we're good. He is acceptable. I'm just kidding. All right, happy Thanksgiving, everyone, and happy Wine Wednesday. We'll see you soon.